everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here today with some crazy glittery makeup. I decided to have fun today with some color on my eyes and glitter gel all over my cheeks. I'm here for it. I hope that you are too. Today we are here for an end of April wrap-up where I discuss the books that I read in the last half of the month. So I read a total of 37 books in the month of April. That is the most books that I have ever read in any month ever. I can see that I've been steadily increasing the number of books that I read per month. So I have 17 books to discuss in this specific video. If you want to see my mid-month wrap-up, I will definitely have that linked up in the cards above. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So the first book that I'm just gonna quickly talk about, because this was a reread for me, that is the Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. Loved this just as much as I did the first time. I adore Stella and Michael so much. Oh God, there is a reason that this is one of my favorite romances of all time. Like, Stella is just such a relatable character. Oh, I love her so much, and I love that this is like a reverse Pretty Woman kind of retelling. Next book I'm not going to spend too long talking about because I discussed it in another recent video of mine, and that is The Kiss of Deception by Mary E. Pearson. So I discussed this book quite a bit in popular books that I DNF'd. I will link that video up in the cards above as well if you want to hear my really in-depth thoughts about why this book just didn't work for me. The only thing I'm going to say in this video is that it was very slow paced. I can only tell you like two major events that happened in the 63% of this book that I read. There wasn't nearly enough like fantastical elements going on. So yeah, unfortunately, this did not work for me. I am so excited to talk about this book. This is The Intimacy Experiment by Rosie Danan. So this is technically book 2 in her companion romance series. The first book was The Roommate, which was a book that I also really enjoyed in 2020. But this book, you guys, is on a completely different level. I am so obsessed. I cannot wait to get my signed physical copy in the mail as soon as possible. I ordered it like last week, so hopefully that will come in soon. But this one is about our main character, Naomi. She is a retired sex worker, but now she's working for this sort of sex education podcast company, things like that. They're definitely branching out into more and more things. This was definitely a big part of The Roommate when they were kind of forming this idea and this company. And then we have Ethan, who is the hero. He is a rabbi, and so he approaches her to give a seminar on modern dating and sex and all of those things to attract younger people to the synagogue that he works for, essentially, and things go on from there. Naomi was a character that I adored in The Roommate, so when this book was announced, I knew that I needed it in my hands immediately, and I knew that I was going to love it, and I really did. Just to kind of name a few things that this book features, we've got kind of a sunshine grump thing going on with Naomi being the grump, although I would say it's more accurate to say that she's like more hardened than anything else, and Ethan being more sunshiny or open. We've also got a bit of the bad girl good guy trope, given that she is a retired sex worker and he's a rabbi, and she definitely fantasizes about corrupting Ethan, and honestly I would too. Like, I fell in love with Ethan so hard reading this book. We also have a taller heroine and slightly shorter hero, which I'm so here for. You know, I feel like I never read romances where the hero is shorter than 6 feet tall, so I love that representation. We've also got the sweetest of cinnamon roll heroes. Ethan is just the best. Also, I adored how modern and refreshing this book felt, and just how sex positive it was. To me, it brings something new and interesting to the romance genre, so wholeheartedly recommend it. Do not be surprised if this ends up in one of my top 10 favorite romances of the year. It was that fantastic. Next book I want to discuss is Anna K, A Love Story by Jenny Lee. So this is book 1 in a duology. The second book, which is called Anna K Away, actually just recently came out, so I'm really looking forward to reading the second and final book in this little duology. But this is essentially a retelling of Anna Karenina in modern times. We have a half Korean main character who is Anna K, and this is kind of like Crazy Rich Asians meets Gossip Girl. It does take place, I think, in the Upper East Side of New York City, so it definitely gives me those Gossip Girl vibes. It's very much like a teenage soap opera in book form. We're following several different characters. They all have a lot going on in their lives. I was endlessly entertained by all of that for sure. I will say that I do think this went on a little bit too long and it was a little slow at times. However, I still enjoyed my time with it so much, so I ended up giving this 4 stars. Also, the intimacy experiment, I don't know if it was clear, but I definitely gave that 5 stars. Next book that I read is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. If you don't know what this is about, which I know a lot of you probably have read this book at this point, because this is a very, very popular literary / historical fiction novel. This takes place in the 50s and 60s in, I want to say, around North Carolina. We're following our main character Kaya throughout her life, basically from childhood to her mid-20s, I want to say, and she is known as the Marsh Girl. And in the present day timeline, which is 1969, when she's in her mid-20s, there is this man who has died of very suspicious circumstances. And so quickly the sheriff suspects that it was foul play or murder. Kaya is the prime suspect and things go on from there. So I really enjoyed Owens's writing for sure. For me, this might sound weird, but I felt like this was just such a sad story and I just didn't understand why it had to be so sad. Like, I don't know, I wanted more for Kaya. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it was well paced, it was well written. The thoughts that I really have about this book are specifically about the ending, so definitely go check out my Goodreads review if you have read this book and you want to know my thoughts about the ending, because I don't want to talk about spoilers in this video, but just know that to me, the ending didn't really make sense for what we are given about Kaya's character. To me, it felt a little bit out of character for her. Also, it's so strange because a subscriber actually brought this to my attention, so thank you so much. I can't remember who it is, but they brought to my attention that Delia Owens has kind of a weird past with a murder that happened in Africa that I think her husband might be guilty of or something, but she's not completely innocent either. There's an article, I think that Slate wrote, detailing all of the weird details about this case. So I'm gonna link that down in the description below because I think it's very interesting to read, especially if you are going to read or you have read this book. Next up, I'm going to quickly talk about All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is book 1 in the Murderbot series. I think there's about like 6 novellas in this series. This ended up just being kind of fine for me. I gave it 3.5 stars. While the story was very interesting and I loved our main character who is a murder bot, and you can guess what kind of robot they are from the title. For me, I think the writing just didn't quite work. And while there were moments where I pretty much laughed out loud because I love the sense of humor that this murder bot has, yeah, this book at the end of the day just didn't blow me away. And so I'm personally not planning on continuing with the series. It makes me kind of sad because I know so many people that adore this series, and I could definitely see where some people would love this for sure, but for me, it just didn't quite work. So yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars. Next up, we have Entreat Me by Grace Draven. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. What's interesting about this one is that it is about a father and a son who are both cursed. And then we have these 2 sisters. The main character, she is a widow at this point, and she's definitely a bit older than her younger sister. And so her younger sister has been courting the son who is cursed. And so they essentially end up going to the castle where both the father and the son live. And the main character ends up falling in love with the father, who is also cursed. So I gave this one 3.5 stars as well. For me, this book was way too long. My goodness, like, I think she could have shaved a good 50 to 100 pages off of the story and it would have packed the same punch. There were some scenes that I felt like went on a little bit too long or weren't the most necessary. So while I really enjoyed the characters, also there were some good smutty scenes going on in this. Yeah, ultimately it was not a complete win for me, so I also gave this 3.5 stars. Next book I want to discuss is Still by Kennedy Ryan. This is book 3 in the Grip trilogy. This is a series that includes a prequel novella and then 2 full-length novels. So this is the end of Grip and Bristol's story. For those of you guys that don't know, this is about Grip, who is an up-and-coming rapper at the very beginning of their story, and then Bristol, who moves to LA to be with her twin brother Reeson, and Reeson works with Grip and they're also best friends. So that's how Grip and Bristol meet, and man, this series is so full of angst and drama. If that is your thing, I think you will absolutely adore this series. But this final book, I gave it 4 stars. For me, just like with the previous novel, which I think is called Grip, I just feel like both of these novels were too long. I just think they could have been edited more. I'm not convinced that Grip and Bristol needed 2 full long novels plus a prequel novella. I mean, my favorite installment of the series was the prequel novella because that one was actually paced really well and ended at a really good and dramatic point. Whereas, yeah, these other 2 books, I didn't love them quite as much. Man, this book was so heavy. My goodness, Kennedy Ryan really puts her characters through it. And I knew going into this series that this was going to be heavy. There was going to be a lot of dramatic things going on, really heavy topics covered. I want to point out that in this book specifically, there is a very difficult pregnancy and birth situation going on, and you should know that there is death of a child involved. I didn't know that going into it, and honestly, I kind of wish that I would have known about it because it was just a lot. I don't think it necessarily would have like detracted me from reading this book, but like I just kind of wish I would have known exactly how heavy and serious this book was going to get. I mean, I still enjoyed it, and Kennedy Ryan's writing is stunning. I really am looking forward to reading more from her. Specifically, what is it, like the Kingmaker duet and then Queen Move, I've heard amazing things about. But yeah, I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Unfortunately, I didn't love this one quite as much as other people that I follow. Next up, we have a book that I was so pumped to get to in April, and that is To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christos. So this is a pirate/siren YA fantasy story. We have our 2 main characters, Lyra, who is a siren princess. Her mother is the Sea Queen. And then we have Elian, who is a prince on land. He is a human while she is a siren. And so basically Lyra does something to really upset her mother, and so her mother turns her into a human and tells her, you need to get Prince Elian's heart by, I think, the winter solstice, or you will stay a human forever. And so this is one of those tropes where it's like, I was sent to kill you, but oops, I fell in love. I love that trope so much. I need to read more of those books for sure. But for me, what fell short was unfortunately the romance between Lyra and Elian. I did think that the world and the story was interesting enough, but for me, I felt like Christo waited a bit too long to introduce the romance at all between these 2 characters. And while I definitely don't mind a slow burn, the problem is that when she did introduce it, I feel like these 2 characters fell in love a little bit too quickly. I wanted more of a, I don't know, continuous slow burn that actually made sense and was believable that these 2 people would fall in love. So unfortunately that did disappoint me a little bit. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. There were some times too where I wasn't the biggest fan of the pacing, so unfortunately I didn't love this book as much as I wanted to, but I still enjoyed it for the most part. Next up, I read 2 books in a series that I am just absolutely obsessed with and I cannot shut up about. So this is The Beast and the Sea Witch from the Wicked Villain series by Katie Roberts. So I read Learn My Lesson and A Worthy Opponent last month, and I knew that I needed to read these right away in April as soon as possible because I loved those first 2 installments that I read so much. So The Beast, as you can tell kind of from the cover, this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but we have Isabel and we have Gaetan and Beast. And so in their past, she was in a relationship with both of them at the same time, but it wasn't a polyamorous relationship. She was in 2 separate relationships, essentially. One with Gaetan and one with Beast. Things blew up. Now they are all back together because of reasons. I'm not going to get too much into the plot, but they decide to try out a truly polyamorous relationship, and it is everything. Oh my goodness. Wow. Like, I don't know if I love this quite as much as Learn My Lesson because I am so obsessed with those 3 characters and how they worked so well together, but this is a very close second in my mind in terms of how I would rank my enjoyment of the series of the 4 books that I have read from it. Sex scenes as usual were chef's kiss. Like, Katie Robert knows how to write polyamorous sex scenes and relationships. I don't know how she makes it so believable that these 3 people would be in a relationship together, but she just does, and it's amazingly good. Like, cannot recommend it enough. And then the Sea Witch is also about a polyamorous relationship. We have Ursa, who is known as the Sea Witch. By the way, this series takes place in a contemporary type world. There's no magic or any like paranormal things going on. Just thought I would point that out in case you were curious. But we have Ursa, who is known as the Sea Witch. She's a very powerful woman in this city that they all live in. And then we have Alaric, who is her sub, basically. And then we have Zuriel, who's kind of like the Ariel character, because you can tell this is like a Little Mermaid retelling. And there is a situation that arises where the three of them end up being together because of a bargain that Zuriel strikes with Ursa, essentially. And this one was really fun as well. I will say I gave this one more like a 4.5 stars just because Alaric's character wasn't my absolute favorite. There was just something about his character that I thought was missing. So unfortunately, this is my least favorite installment of the series so far. However, I still really enjoyed it. Like, again, the sex scenes are incredible. Katie Roberts' writing is just everything for me. I cannot wait to read more from her. I am planning on reading the last book in the series, which is Queen Takes Rose. I am not planning on reading Desperate Measures, which is the first installment. That one is about Jafar and Jasmine, but there's a lot of CNC content, or consensual non-consent, going on in that book. And I will say there's a little bit of that going on in The Beast too, but it wasn't too much. Whereas in Desperate Measures, I've heard that there is a lot of CNC going on. So I just thought I would mention that. But yeah, this series is amazing. This is the dark erotic romance series of my dreams. And it's so weird because I didn't think I was someone that enjoyed dark romance all that much, but like this series has completely changed my mind. Next up, I'm just going to talk about these books together because they're part of the same series. So this is A Daring Arrangement and A Scandalous Deal, both by Joanna Shupe. This is books 1 and 2 in her 400 series or trilogy. I felt very similarly about both of these books. Actually, I gave them both 3.5 stars. I thought that both of them started out really strong and I liked the premises overall. Like, this one is about a fake engagement. We have Lady Honora Parker. She wants to get engaged as soon as possible to a scandalous type of man so that her father will send her back to England, where she is from, so that she can marry the man that she actually wants to marry. And then we have Julius, our hero, who is definitely a scandalous type of person, I guess you could say. So they agree to this daring arrangement where he will be her fake fiance and she will introduce him to well-to-do people in New York society, because this whole series takes place in New York City in the Gilded Age, because of reasons. I don't want to spoil what that is, but yeah. So while this one started off strong, the middle towards the end was just like fine for me, so I gave this 3.5 stars. Same thing with this one. So the premise here is that we have Lady Eva. She has been pretending to be her father, basically, who is an architect. They are also from London. Her father essentially has Alzheimer's disease, so he's not able to do his job, so she takes it over. And so our hero Philip is building a luxury hotel in New York City, so he contracts Eva's father, but it's really Eva who's coming up with the plans for this hotel and everything. And so she makes the trip over to New York and tells Philip that she is her father's assistant when really she is doing her father's work. And so things go on from there. What I liked about this one is this one actually starts with a one-night stand-ish kind of situation, because the two of them meet on the boat over from London. They have a very enjoyable night together. So when they officially meet in New York City, it's definitely a crazy WTF moment, because they didn't expect, you know, the stranger that they had a one-night stand with to be the person that they have to actually work with to build this hotel. So yeah, same thing as Daring Arrangement. It started off pretty strong, but the middle and end was just fine for me. So I also gave this 3.5 stars. Okay guys, we have just a few books left to talk about. I promise we are getting to the end. So next book I'm going to talk about is Call Me Maybe by Cara Bastone. So this is an Audible original audiobook. I don't think there's an ebook in existence for this book. And this is about our heroine who calls a customer service line to get help for her website, kind of like a Squarespace type company. And the guy who answers is really helpful to her, and it's just really adorable because they form this friendship and romantic relationship by the very end over the phone because he's trying to help her with her website. It sounds a little bit weird as I'm telling it to you, but I promise it's adorable. Like, this has some of the best banter that I've ever read. Just so good. Such a charming and adorable story. I gave it 4 stars. This is a series, I believe, because there's a second audiobook out. I think it's called Sweet Talk, and I definitely plan on listening to that one soon as well. Next up is Never Kiss a Duke by Megan Frampton. So I was really excited to read a book by Megan Frampton because she is an author that I have heard some people compare to Tessa Dare because her sense of humor kind of has Tessa Dare vibes, and I do agree with that because at the beginning of this book I was definitely getting those kinds of vibes from Megan Frampton's writing. But unfortunately I ended up giving this 3 stars. Similar to the Joanna Shute books, this one started off strong enough, but then as it went along I kind of got more and more bored, and by the end was just waiting for it to be over, unfortunately. So I'm not gonna go too deep into the plot for this one, but we have our heroine Ivy. She runs a gambling hell. And then we have our hero Sebastian. Yes, that's his name. And basically all his life he's been led to believe that he is the heir, and then he eventually becomes the Duke. And then at the very beginning of this novel, a solicitor comes to his house and tells him that he is in fact not the Duke, and his cousin Thaddeus is actually the Duke. And so now he doesn't know what to do with his life, and so he ends up getting a job at this gambling hell that Ivy runs, and things go on from there. I really like the premise of this one. That was the reason why I decided to read this book as my first Megan Frampton book. Yeah, I just think that Megan Frampton could have done more with this premise and these characters. She could have done more to make them more dynamic and interesting and give them more depth. I just wanted more in general, right? So that's why I ended up giving this 3 stars. Next is a novella that I am absolutely obsessed with. This is Breaking the Bully by Jessa Kane. So this is my very first Jessa Kane novella. If you don't know who this author is, she writes a ton of romance novellas. Some of them can get pretty wild and crazy. The premise of this one I feel like is more tame than some of her other books, but yeah, my first Jessa Kane book definitely did not disappoint. This is one that Brie from In Love and Words talked about recently, and I was very intrigued because she said that, you know, she actually really enjoyed this bully romance when I know that that is a trope that she pretty much hates. So I was very intrigued by that. But this is about our main characters, Allie and Moore. Allie is very wealthy and rich, and Moore is quite the opposite of that. They are in high school when they meet. I do want to say that most of this book takes place when they're 18, they're seniors in high school. I did want to point that out just because I know some people feel uneasy about reading explicit sex scenes that are about teenagers, but in my mind, they're both 18, they're both consenting adults, so I'm fine with it, and I think most people are as well, but I did want to bring that up in case you do feel a bit uneasy about that. But essentially, these two characters have kind of always been attracted to each other, but Allie's father is extremely both emotionally and physically abusive to her. So he threatens her and tells her, if you don't ignore Moore, then I will make your life a living hell. And so that's exactly what she does. She stops talking to him, looking at him, anything like that, and so Moore interprets that as her thinking that she's too good for him, and so he starts bullying her. Then later on in the novella, we see things come to light, and one of the things that is amazing about this bully romance is that there is tons of groveling. So good. Also, I want to mention there's tons of pining from both characters, but really Moore is just obsessed with Allie. Also, we have a virgin hero, we have an obsessive hero, but in the best way possible, and also like all of the flame emojis for chemistry and sex scenes. Like, this was like the perfect romance novella for me and the perfect bully romance for me. It's not a trope that I normally love either, but like Jessa Kane just knows how to write that trope. So I highly recommend checking this out for yourself. All of Jessa Kane's books are on Kindle Unlimited, by the way. Last but certainly not least, I ended April with Punching the Air by Ibi Zoboi and Yusef Salaam. So Yusef Salaam is of the Exonerated Five, And so this is a book that is written in verse. It is a YA contemporary about our main character Amal. He's a black teenager who gets arrested and put in jail for beating up a white boy. And there is, of course, so much more to the story than that. My goodness, these two authors know how to write together so well, like just seamlessly. Writing this story in verse was the perfect format for sure. Something else that I found very interesting about this story is that reading the author's note, you find out that Ibi Zoboi actually used some of Yusef Salaam's poetry that he wrote when he was in prison and put them into the book. I think it added a lot to Amal's character and the overall story and all of that. And if you are still not convinced that you need to read this book, I'm going to read a quote from the author's note. So it says, "Punching the Air is about the power of art, faith, and transcendence in the most debilitating circumstances. It's our hope that all readers will experience the journey of a boy who finds himself in a heated moment where one wrong move threatens the future and how he uses his art to express his truth, the truth." I also want to mention that there's content warnings, there's episodes of violence and racism, and also the N-word is used several times throughout. I just wanted to put that out there for you guys. Yeah, I could go on about how amazing this book is, but if you loved books like Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds or The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, I think you will get a lot out of this book. Highly, highly recommend. I, of course, gave this 5 stars. All right, guys, that's going to be it for this video. I hope that you enjoyed. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. And yeah, with that being said, I would love it if you would leave a like and subscribe. And I thank you in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!